Welcome to week 3 of Under Pressure. If you haven't been with us for the first 2 weeks of this series, let me see if I can catch you up. You don't really need me to tell you that you live your life under pressure. It could be pressure in a relationship, it might be pressure at work, it might be pressure caused by some other area of your life, but most of us live with this tremendous feeling of stress in the areas of our life. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been saying that one of the primary reasons that we feel pressure is because we live our lives without any margin. And margin we've been describing as the extra. Margin is the extra 15 minutes you have to get somewhere so that you're not late. When you have that extra space, that extra margin, you're not stressed about being there because you know you have extra. But for most of us, the pressure that we feel in life, whether it's in a relationship, I don't have emotional distance, I don't have enough emotional margin, I don't have enough emotional headroom to handle what's going on in your life, or it's in my world at work, it's caused because I don't have enough margin in my life, and so I live my life under tremendous pressure. And nowhere is that more true than what I'm going to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about the stress, the pressure you feel in the area of money. Now, if you're new around here or you haven't been to church for a while and the last time you were in church you felt like they talked about money a lot, I know what it sounds like when churches want to talk about money. But I just want to say something to you. I don't want anything from you. I'm not trying to raise money. We're not about to build something, spend something, that kind of thing. This is not about me trying to get money from you. I don't want anything from you. I want something for you. I want to talk to you about the stress we feel in this area. You know, last week when we talked in the area of time, we said that your time is limited, so you need to count your days and you need to make the best use of your time. Every bit of time you have will be spent. Well, you might think about money in the same way, but there's this one big difference between your time and your money. Whereas with time, you can't borrow time from anybody. You can't go to somebody and say, hey, give me an extra 15 minutes. You can't borrow time. But when it comes to money, you can borrow money. And when you have the opportunity to borrow money, if you're not already managing your money well, if you're not careful with what you do, then you wind up borrowing money, and what you wind up having happen is then there's this problem that happens. When I live with no margin financially, when I can borrow money, before long financially, I have no extra room, I have no extra space, I have no margins, which means I can make no errors because I'm right to my limit. I have totally leveraged everything. I live at my limit or beyond my limit, and every month and every week and every day and year after year, I feel more and more and more financial pressure. So I want to talk to you about that today and how to create some margin financially so we don't live constantly under pressure. And to start at this, I want to say something to you that needs to become a part of our thinking. And this is one of those things that when I say it, you're probably going to think, well, I hadn't really thought about that before. I agree with that, but I just hadn't thought about it before. But it's so subtle that our culture sort of convinces us of the opposite of it. Here it is. There's a big difference between standard of living and quality of life. There's a huge difference between my standard of living and my quality of life. But every day in our culture, somebody is trying to tell us that if I can raise my standard of living, if I can drive a better this, if I can live in a better that, if I can dress in a nicer this, if I can raise my standard of living, I'll have a higher quality of life. But nothing could really be further from the truth. And many of you know this from experience. It's one of the things that happens for some of people that have ever gone to developing countries. When you go on one of our trips, like with us to Haiti, one of the things that people see is that people have a much lower standard of living, but many of them, they always talk about it, feels like they have a higher quality of life. And you've experienced this, some of you, if you haven't had that, you've experienced it in your own life. You and your wife live in a nicer place than you've ever lived. You have nicer cars. You have nicer things. You and your kids and everybody in your family, you have nicer things, but you argue all the time about money. You feel pressure about what's going on with what you're doing all the time. You have more stuff than you ever have. You have more things, but you don't enjoy the things that you have because there's stress between you and the people that you're with. And you have a higher standard of living, but you don't have the quality of life that you thought it would bring you. And you have more stuff, but you don't really enjoy the stuff. You can't raise your standard of living with debt. So you can raise your standard of living, you can raise your standard of living of debt, but you cannot raise your quality of life that way. And here's what I want you to think about. If there is a God, and all surveys tell us that almost everybody in our country believes that there is a God. If there is a God who cares about you, I mean, he's not mad at you, he's not trying to punish you for something. If those things are true, which of those two do you guess God would be more concerned about? Your standard of living or your quality of life? Well, let me ask it this way to you. If you're married, would you rather have a really happy marriage and less stuff, or a somewhat unhappy or very unhappy marriage, but you drive really cool cars? See, some of you have already tried this. You have really nice house and really cool cars, but you don't want to go home because everything at your house is chaos. And at some point, it dawns on us. And I'll just say, the earlier it can dawn on you, the better. If I could give a gift to every middle and high school student listening, to every college-age person listening, I'd give you this gift. It dawns on you at some point that what really matters to me is quality of life, not standard of living. See, at some point in your life, having a nicer, newer, better this, living in a nicer, better place, driving a cooler, faster, one of these nicer things, it doesn't matter near as much as the quality of life that you have. And the sooner you can figure that out and hold on to it, the more important it is for you living the life that you want to live. So I want to talk to you about how to move to quality of life today. And I want to tell you 3 things that I know about you as we begin this talk. I've been teaching people about money in this kind of way for a long time now, and the number one thing I know, it's never really changed. Number one, you're living on a percentage of your income. Everybody listening, everybody joining in, you're living on a percentage of your income. It might be 70%, it might be 80%, it might be 90%. If it's most people in our country live on 100%. Many, many, many people in our country live on 125, 130% of their income. You're living on a percentage of your income. And the second thing I know is you probably don't know what that percentage is. You don't know what that percentage is. And this is just huge. You're living on a percentage of your income, but you never think about it. And this is so important. I learned this from a little boy, from my dad when I was a little boy. I taught this to my kids. I hope to get it in the heads of my grandchildren. Every time I have a chance to talk to a young couple when they're just starting out, I try to give them old man advice. I try to say this to them. Pick a percentage of your income and just live on that. I mean, a lot of people talk about budgets. I believe in budgets. I've always had a budget. I think they're important, but a lot of people don't want to think about budgets and be that detailed. So I just say to them, hey, pick a percentage of your income and just live on that. You're going to live on a percentage of your income anyway. I mean, you're going to live on a percentage. Why not pick one? If you don't pick one, somebody will pick one for you. The creditor will pick it for you. A mortgage company will pick it for you. You know, the marketers will pick it for you. Culture will pick one for you. As all of us are going to live on a percentage of our incomes anyway, I bet you never really have thought about that. I bet you don't know what percentage you're living on. Pick a percentage that you want to live on. If you don't, you'll allow someone else to set that percentage for you. The second thing I know is that you believe that if you made just a little bit more, everything would be fine for you. I mean, how many times have you had that thought in your life? If I just had a little bit more, if I could get just another $5,000, if I could make just a little bit more, have a second job, we would all be fine. We've all thought that. And the reason we think that is because of the first one. We've never picked a percentage of our income to live on, so we think if we had just a little bit more, everything would be okay. Third thing is, you thought that when you had less than you have now. And by that I mean, you thought that if you had a little bit more, you'd be okay, and you thought that when you had less. Like, remember when you first got your first job and you got your first amount of money, whatever they paid you, and you held it in your hand and you knew it wasn't very much, and you thought to yourself, man, if I just made more. Well, imagine back to that day when you got that first check. If somebody had come to you and said, hey, one day you're going to be making what you make right now, but when you make what you make right now, not this little bit you have in your hand, but if you make what you're making right now, they said to you, you'll still financial pressure? You'd said to them, that's not true. If I make that amount of money, I'd be happy forever. But you always think that you want more, and you thought that when you made less. And here you are, you said, if I could ever get to the place where I made 10,000 more, or for some of you 100,000 more, and now you make that amount. Or remember when you thought, if I could just get from being hourly to having a salary, or you got where you place, you said, if I get to the place where I had a salary and they paid for my benefits, well, that'd be all I need. And here you are, you're in a better place than you've ever been, and you still feel like this. You feel like if you just had more, it'd be okay. If I had a little bit more, everything would be fine. That's what lack of margin will do to you. And the interesting thing is that we will never, ever change this in us unless you decide to change it. Now, some of you, I just said all of that, and some of you heard me say it, and you still don't get it. So I want to show it to you visually. I have a chart. So here's a chart, and across the bottom of the chart, there's a line, and that represents time, and the other one going up the screen represents money. So hopefully, as time goes along, your income increases. Now, that's true for most of us, and the point of this chart is not really whether that's true or not. So I know some of you have had job cuts and that kind of thing. It's not about income. This chart's not about income. The chart really is about where is your lifestyle, where is your spending on this. And whether it's true that you make more or not, it's really about that line. Now, for most of us, our lifestyle and our income have just kept pace. That means as money comes in, it goes right back out. But then as time goes along, we get the ability to borrow money and to buy things and increase our income even though we don't make money. And now I've spent more than I actually make because I can make payments on these things, and I'm right at the point of making payments on everything. But then something happens. There's an illness, or things go down in value, or I have a job loss, or something happened to my wife's job, or I can't do that thing anymore. And then I live under tremendous pressure because I'm upside down. The goal of this chart is that there would be margin. That's why I said pick a percentage and live on it. The goal is that there would be some space between my income and my spending, and that there would be margin. That margin is the space in between, on the good side, of my spending and my income, so that my lifestyle doesn't just keep pace with whatever I make, and I don't get myself in a situation. That is, I develop a system and a strategy where there's always margin between my spending and my income. Then if my income goes down, then if they cut me back a little bit at work, then if somebody loses something, then if there's something that pops up, immediately I don't feel pressure because I already had some margin in my life, and I can survive, and my relationship can survive, and I don't live under pressure. Now, here's what I know about this margin financially. You want this. Christian or not, you want this. Believe it or not, first time at church or not, you want your finances to look like this. Red and yellow, black and white, you want this. Married, single, married with kids, married without kids, married with kids that you wish would move out of the house, it doesn't matter. We all want this. I want there to be space between what I spend and my income. Because what happens in margin is I can breathe. I can relate. I can care about you. In margin, we get along better. In margin, I sleep better. In margin, I don't feel like I have to drive so fast. In margin, I'm not moving all the time. And if all you get out of hearing me talk about this today is that you decide I'm going to do whatever legally is right to get me to where I can have this margin thing, then I have done a great service for you, even if you get nothing else out of this. If you decide I'm going to do whatever is legally possible to get to this place, that's a good thing. But the truth is, most of us don't live here. Most of us don't live with margin. And it's not because you don't make enough money, and it's not because the economy's bad, and it's not because of this president or the past president, and it's because you haven't chosen. And when you don't choose, the more money that you make, the more that you spend, and then the pressure just increases, and then there's an Then I get an injury, and I can't do it anymore, and then something happens to my spouse, and she can't work as much, or something happens to my spouse, and he can't do what he used to do. Something happens, or we have a baby. You know what babies do? They eat margin. I mean, oh, there's something that happens. And sometimes it's something unexpected. But for most of it, it's just because we didn't pay attention. We just didn't pay attention that our spending and our income were tracking right along. And then we're under tremendous pressure when something happens, and now the little bit of tension we had in a relationship, now I have real marriage problems. Then when I was under pressure in other areas of my life, now I feel tremendous pressure. I feel like I'm a slave to money. I feel like I have to work every day, and there's no joy in it, because if I miss anything, everything's going to go upside down. I'm a slave to everything financial, and money says to me, you can't buy that, can't go there, she can't go to that school, he can't do that kind of thing. You can't do those kind of things. You become a slave emotionally because, as we said the first week, when stress increases, my focus gets real focused on my problem, and I don't have anything emotionally to give you. So I can't relate very well because there is nothing left for me to give to you because my focus is on finances. I become a slave in every way in my life to what's happening in my money. Who would want that? Well, no one. And you know, the thing is, if you're a follower of Christ, this is a really big deal. This may just sound like a money talk, but I'm just saying to you, spiritually, this is a really big deal. If you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, then this might have been interesting to you, maybe not, but I'll just say to you, for those of us that are here and we're followers of Jesus, this is a really big deal. And even if you aren't a follower of Jesus, you're not a Christian, you just know Jesus talked about this being a slave thing 2,000 years ago. There's a guy named Luke who writes one of the biographies of Jesus' life, and he tells us that Jesus told a parable one time. That is, Jesus told this made-up story, and he talked about a crooked money manager that he finds out his boss has caught him in his mismanagement of the money, and he realizes, I've got just a little bit of time and a little bit of space to make something happen. So he begins to leverage his time and space to get friends so that when he gets axed by his boss, he'll still have a job. It's a great story. I love to teach on it. It's got a statement at the end a lot of people don't get, and maybe we'll talk about that sometime. But at the end of that, when Jesus is drawing the overall conclusion, he makes a statement about this thing, and that's what I want to talk to you about. At the very end of it, Jesus says, no one can serve two masters. Now, some of you have been in jobs like that where you had an immediate supervisor and he'd tell you something to do something, and then you had a big boss and they'd come in and tell you to do something opposite, and you didn't know whether you could make your immediate supervisor happy because he's the one that writes the report, or you're going to make your big boss unhappy and you're going to fire you, and you just felt pulls. There's tension, and you got to serve one or the other. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and you'll be devoted to the other, or you'll love one and despise the other. He says, have you ever been in that situation where there's this tug of war where there are two people telling you to do one thing, and you got two different people, two different groups, and they're pulling you in one way? You will always be inclined to lean toward one and away from the other. And then Jesus sums it up and says, you cannot serve both God and money. And we seem to think in our culture it should say both God and Satan. You can't serve God and Satan. Jesus says, no, the real danger is trying to serve God and money. That is, if you find yourself in a situation where money is saying to you, you got to do that, you got to go over there, you got to do that, and Jesus says, no, this is the way I want you to go, this is where I want you to live, I want you to give, and I want you to be generous, but your Visa bill's telling you can't do it. When you find yourself in that, when God's saying to you, I want you to live this way, and I want you to follow me, I want you to do this kind of thing, if you find yourself in that situation, you should know it's not unusual for you to find yourself in a place where you live with no margin financially, where you feel torn between your devotion to God, following God, and your devotion to money. Now, and I'll just say it again, this is so vitally important if you're a follower of Christ. If money is master because, you traded, you borrowed, you spent your way into slavery financially, if money is your master, where really you come and you open the Bible and you see what Jesus says to do and you want to do it, but Visa says you can't do that, the mortgage company says you can't do that, your bills tell you you can't do it. When Jesus says you need to do this, but you can't do it because money says you can't, it's crystal clear, isn't it? You're not following Jesus. You're following your money. Or what about this one? I mean, don't you hate this verse where it says, don't worry. Just don't worry about your life. I say to you, don't worry, Jesus says. Don't worry about your life. And you read that and you're like, have you seen my financial world? I mean, I don't want to worry, but I worry all the time. I worry about what's going to happen. And Jesus says, hey, I just tell you, don't worry. And you feel this tension. I want to follow Jesus. I'm devoted to Jesus. I love what he's done for me, but how can I not worry with what's going on in my life? And Ed, I love coming here most of the time, not so much today, but I love being a part of this. I love the insight. I love that my kids are being taught this stuff. But when it comes down to outright doing this stuff, I can't do it. I mean, I can't do it because I've already agreed to do what my stuff tells me, what my money tells me. And Jesus can't be my master financially. I can't follow him financially. I can't do what he asked me to do financially. I can't do that because I've already committed that to something else. And then relationally, I mean, almost the whole of following Jesus in the New Testament is something about one another, serve one another, love one another, give to one another, help one another, forgive one another, accept one another. Well, when I feel this pressure financially, I can't do much one another because when my pressure goes up, my focus gets real narrow to me, and I don't have any space for you relationally. I can't one another anybody because it's all about me. I can't lead my family in that way. I can't even love them that way. So if you're a follower of Jesus, I just want to say to you again, I mean, I'm going to give some practical stuff that'll apply whether you believe this or not, but for followers of Jesus, money is a deeply spiritual issue. And you got to create financial margin because it's in the margin that you'll find peace. It's in the margin that you'll find joy in life. It's in margin you find the space to serve and to love and to be generous and to be gracious to people that are around you. It's in the margin that your relationships are better because you're not all worried all the time and you're not so focused on yourself and you're not bent out of shape over money. Who is going to be your master? If you're a Christian and you're upside down financially, I mean, let's just be honest. You have two masters. And you're going to lean toward one and away from the other. And so your Heavenly Father who loves you so much in this area, in all areas of your life, says to you what we've been saying this whole series. He says, hey, come on, step back from the pressure. Step back from doing your absolute limit. Step back, spend less so you can live more. Do less so you can have more life. Lower your standard of living maybe so you can have a higher quality of life. Create some margin where you can follow me. So how do we do that? What do I do if I want that? Well, I want to give you some next steps. And if you would right now, if you'd go ahead and grab the connection card, campus pastor's already talked about that. It's probably on your seat or nearby. If you're already sitting on it, just grab one out of the chair next to you and get a pen and put your name on the front of it and maybe a text number or an email where we can connect with you. And you can just drop this in the offering in just a few minutes. And I'm going to talk to you about the next steps now that are on the back of that. And I just want to know that even if you can't mark one of these next steps, I hope you'll go ahead and drop the card with your name in it because we pray for every one of these cards. And even if you can't choose the next step, even if you honestly can't say, I'm going to do this, I hope you drop the card in because we don't believe you're here by accident. We want to pray for you. We want to help you in any way that we can. But as I talk about these steps, I just want you to listen with this card in your hand, and maybe God will move you to take one of these steps. But I have to be really honest now. There are only a couple of steps, but the first one is the one that matters. In fact, I just want to say to you, if you don't decide to do the first one, and I'm not trying to dumb anything down or push you in any place. I just know that this is how this works. If you don't decide to do the first one, nothing else is going to matter in this. So here's the first one. You have to decide. I have to decide. I just have to decide that I'm going to do this, right? That's what it takes. This managing my money better is a lot like exercise. Nobody can honestly say, well, I don't exercise because I don't know how to do it. Exercise is not about not knowing how. Exercise is about a decision I make to do it. And then the discipline to make that decision day after day after day after day. Managing money is the same way. Debt will get you a higher standard of living. Discipline is how you get a higher quality of life. So step number 1 is I have to decide I'm not going to live this way anymore. I decide I'm not doing this anymore. This isn't about how. If you make the decision, there's lots of information everywhere you can get on how. If you don't know where to find it, we'd love to help you find it. We have classes that can help you find out how. But let's just be clear. Taking the class without deciding that you're not going to do what you have been doing is worthless. The first step is, some of you just need to get disgusted enough or mad enough or frustrated enough to say, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to create financial margin in my life. I'm not blaming the president anymore, or the past president, or the economy, or our governor, or my boss, or my wife, or my husband. I'm not blaming anybody. This is my life, my decisions. I'm deciding I'm not living like this anymore. I will live with financial margin. Step number 1 is I just decide. And honestly, if you can't take any other steps, I hope you will decide that I'm going to create margin in my life. If you want an extra step, then step number 2 is pick a percentage and live on it. You just decide what percentage, less than 100, what percentage am I going to live on? What percentage do I want between those two lines? How much margin do I want financially in my life? Now, I understand some of you are like, Ed, you just don't get it. I want it, but I can't do it. If you just let me sit down and talk to you, you'd see why I can't do it. I get all that. That's why I'm not talking about how. I want you to set a target. Sit down with yourself or get alone, or if it's you and your spouse, get together, whoever you need to get, sit down and decide. In an ideal world, what would that margin be? Would it be 5%? Would it be 10%? Would it be 30%? You won't believe this, but there are actual couples in our church that decided when they got married, even though both of us work, we'll live on one income. That's the amount of margin they decided. No matter what happens, our limit is we're going to live on one income. We're going to have that amount of margin. Now, you may not believe that's true. I'm telling you it's true. And there are people sitting right around you. They have peace. They have relationships that are growing because they decided from the start, we're going to create margin. You pick a percentage. And then you decide, I'm going to live on that. Now, if you don't know what a percentage looks like, I'm going to try one more time. And I'm going to show you the simplest way I know. I've taught this for 30 years. I taught my children this way. I've taught people, hundreds, maybe thousands of people that in this church this way. This is what margin looks like. And I'm going to give you the margin that the Bible sets forth, that God says this is the way I want human beings to live. Every time you get 10 of these, every time you get 10 of these, God says, okay, if you follow me, I want one. Give me one. We're like, but God, you gave me grace. You paid for my sin. God, you give me life, and every time I pray, you come through for me. I don't think one of 10, that doesn't seem like enough. God goes, I'm only asking for one. You go, wow, I get to live on the rest of this? No, God said, that's not all. First, you give one to me to demonstrate that I'm first place in your life. And then second, I want you to prepare for your future, because you need to count your days, you need to number your days, you need to think about those, you need to prepare. So I want you to take one, and I want you to set it aside for your future. And then you think, well, I'll get the rest. God goes, well, you have committed to pay some other people, so pay them first, and then you get to live on the rest. You get to live on the rest. That's what looking like living on a percentage is. I get to live on this. I have margin in my life. Now let me tell you why this is so significant and why it's so important. Most of us live with, it's me first. I just live with me first. And God goes, as long as you live with me first, you're never going to have any margin. As long as you put you first, it's never going to be enough. You're never going to make enough. You're always going to think a little bit more. You're going to live right to the edge because your desires, the marketers around you, they're going to always drive you to spend it all on you. You've got to decide that you are not first, you're fourth. It's God first because He gave you life. He lets you suck air on His planet. It's God first, and then it's your future, and then it's whoever you decided that you would be in debt to, and then you live on the rest. This is what you live on. If you pay off your creditors, you get to move from fourth to third. God says, that's the way I want you to live. And when you do that, let me tell you, you live this way, you have space to breathe, and live, and love, and enjoy. You have quality of life. As long as you decide that you are first, you will live with no margin. But you have to decide. You've got to decide, I'm going to create margin. And then you pick a percentage and you live on it. And then you'll develop a plan to follow God in the way that He has. This is a lifestyle that frees you up for more life. That's what I want for you. That's what God wants for you. That's what your Heavenly Father says. Would you choose to live like this? Now let me say something else to you as you choose one of those next steps, and you get ready to put it in the offering in a minute when it comes by. Let me just say something to you, because I'm not sure I've said all of this really well, and I know the whole topic of money, it hits people different places, is so emotional. I just want to say this to you again. If you take these steps and if you pick a percentage, you decide I'm going to do this, and when you realize the dollar figure that percentage you want represents, you're going to feel something. Here's what I want to say to you. Even if you need to get a loan to do this, when you feel something and you think to yourself, there's no way I can live on this, this is crazy, I'm going to chunk the whole thing, I can't do it. I just want to say to you, before you do this, I want you to come up with that number, I want you to write it on a sheet of paper, and then I just want you to look at it. And while you're looking at it, I want you to just feel whatever you feel while you're looking at that horrible number, and then I want you to pray. If you have the guts, I want you to pray this prayer. Lord, why am I feeling what I feel about that number? I mean, some of you, you're going to look at that number and you're going to feel afraid. God, I'm so afraid. I'll never be able to do. I'll never be able to have. You're going to feel fear. Well, fear is a spiritual issue. That's a spiritual issue that you can deal with you and God. Some of you are going to feel jealousy because you're going to realize, if I live on that number, I'm going to have to lower my standard of living. Friends and people around me, they'll have more, and you're going to feel jealousy. Jealousy is a spiritual issue. That's something you can deal with you and God. Some of you are going to feel greed because you're just going to go, I just want more. I just want more. I don't want to lower my standard of living. Greed is a spiritual issue. Some of you are going to be angry. You're going to be angry at your boss, or you're angry at your spouse. You're going to be angry at your ex-wife. You're going to be angry at somebody. Anger is a spiritual issue. And in that moment, as you're praying that prayer and you're looking at that number, God will use these to draw the attention to some spiritual issues in your life. And those you can work on with your Heavenly Father. And you can move toward having margin and peace in your life. I'm praying that you will. And that over time you'll get margin. And maybe you'll spend less, but you will have more life. Let me pray. Father in heaven, I thank you for the time that people have given to join in on this today. God, I pray that you'll take whatever it is we feel about this topic, anger or fear or jealousy or whatever it is, and you'll help us to feel it and then to bring it to you. God, thank you for people that taught this to me so that at least in this one area of my life, I haven't messed up. I just haven't screwed this up, and I feel peace. I pray for other people that right now live under such tremendous financial pressure that they will follow your plan, live with margin, and enjoy the quality of life that you want for them. Thank you for Jesus. who brings every good gift to us, if we will listen and have the wisdom to follow. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.